Camera AA samples are solely responsible for all direct samples, motion blur, and depth of field. Diffuse and specular are only for indirect sample noise. Transmission is only for specular transmission depth, which are the rays bouncing around inside of shiny transparent things. Subsurface scattering is for subsurfaces. If you haven't made any subsurfaces and you don't have anything see-through in your scene, you can leave these values at 0. So, how can you tell where noise is coming from in your scene? A good way to diagnose noise is to use AOVs. Let's look at how to set up diagnostic AOVs. In the Render Settings AOV tab, I'm going to add Direct Diffuse, Diffuse Indirect, Indirect, Shadow Matte, Specular Direct, Specular Indirect, Subsurface Scattering, or SSS, Transmission Direct, and Transmission Indirect. Let's start with direct versus indirect light. Direct light is light from a light source that hits your object directly. Indirect light bounces off something in your scene and then hits your object. Here I have something like a Cornell box with some 3D objects inside. All of the lights in the scene are white. One wall is pink and the other wall is green to illustrate direct versus indirect light. Using AOVs, let's take a look at the direct and indirect lighting. I'm in the Arnold render view, not the Viewport 2.0. In this drop-down on the left, you can find all the AOVs that we just added. I'm going to look at the direct lighting. You can see here we have direct diffuse and direct specular, the little shiny reflections that are caused by direct lighting. We don't see any pink or green from lights bouncing around the scene. We don't see any light bouncing up off the floor. What we see in this AOV can only be affected by camera AA samples. If there is noise in your direct AOV, changing any of the other sample values, like diffuse for example, will not make a difference. All it will do is increase render time. Now let's look at indirect. Here we do see lots of pink and green and floor bounces. Indirect light can be denoised by those other sliders: diffuse, specular, transmission, subsurface. But remember, those values are multiplied by camera AA. If you turn up these sliders and then later have to increase camera AA to denoise your direct lights, you should be turning these values back down.